You don't feel like Gen X. You don't feel like a millennial either. And for a lot of people, neither of those identities feels quite right. If I asked you to picture a millennial, you might imagine someone who grew up with the internet, fluent in social media, digital life, constant connection. If I asked you to picture Gen X, you'd probably think of mixtapes, MTV, a childhood that was completely analog. But there's a group of people born in a narrow window, roughly between 1977 and 1985, who don't fully belong to either world. You may have heard them called Xennials. People who had an analog childhood and a digital young adulthood. For decades, they've existed in a kind of gap, not quite Gen X, not quite millennial. And that feeling of being in between, it's not just a label problem, it's psychological, because that transition wasn't a flaw, it was a training ground. This group developed something rare, a kind of psychological bilingualism. But there's another layer to this that most people never consciously notice. This group didn't just experience two different worlds, they experienced two completely different speeds of life. The analog world moved slower. There were natural pauses built into everything. Waiting wasn't frustrating, it was normal. You waited for information. You waited for responses. You waited for things to happen. And in that waiting, your mind had space. Space to think, space to reflect, space to process reality without constant interruption. Then the digital world arrived and removed those gaps entirely. Suddenly, everything became instant. Information, communication, entertainment, always available, always updating, always pulling your attention forward. And adapting to that shift required something deeper than just learning technology. It required rewiring attention itself. This is why many people in this group feel a subtle tension they can't always explain. They can function in high-speed digital environments, but they're also aware of what was lost in the transition. The ability to sit without stimulation, the ability to focus without fragmentation, the ability to experience time without constantly filling it. And that awareness creates a kind of internal contrast. They don't just live in the modern world, they can see it from the outside. They remember what it replaced. Which is why overstimulation feels heavier, why constant noise feels draining faster, why endless scrolling feels empty, even when it's engaging. Because part of their mind was built in a world where attention wasn't constantly under attack. And that difference quietly shapes how they experience everything. They're fluent in two completely different worlds that, to other generations, feel like foreign countries. Their childhood was slower. If you wanted information, you had to go find it. A library, an encyclopedia. If you wanted to talk to a friend, you called their house, and sometimes had to speak to their parents first. If you missed your favorite show, it was just gone. No replay. No rewind. That world wasn't just nostalgic, it trained the brain, it built patience, it forced creativity. You had to solve problems with whatever was around you. And over time, that builds something deeper, a strong internal sense of control. Your brain learned to generate its own stimulation, to sit in boredom and turn it into something. You learned how to be alone without feeling lonely, and that skill is becoming rare. Then everything changed. Right in the middle of their formative years, late teens, early 20s, the world flipped. The internet arrived. The sound of dial-up became the beginning of a new reality. Technology wasn't something they were born into. They had to learn it, adapt to it, figure it out. Unlike digital natives, they weren't dropped into the stream. They had to consciously learn how to swim. But unlike older generations, they didn't resist it either. They adapted quickly, and that created something powerful. They remember the logic of a world before everything was online, a world where privacy was the default, where mistakes could fade. But they're also fully functional in the digital world, which makes them something rare, a bridge between two completely different systems of living. Then came the pressure, because every generation is shaped by the moments that hit them at the exact wrong time. For this group, it was a double impact. First, 9/11, the sense of stability disappeared overnight. The world suddenly felt unpredictable, unsafe. Then, just as they started building careers, 2008 hit, the financial crisis. Jobs disappeared, opportunities collapsed. people who were just getting started found themselves stuck, set back, rebuilding from nothing, and that combination left a mark. It created something you could call cynical optimism, a strange mix of two opposites. They don't fully trust systems because they've seen them fail, they've seen stability vanish. But at the same time, they still believe effort matters. That progress is possible, not guaranteed, but possible. They don't expect things to be easy, but they also don't assume they're impossible, and that balance is rare. There's something else most people miss. This group had something no longer available today, an undocumented adolescence. Their teenage years, awkward moments, mistakes, identity shifts, weren't permanently recorded. They exist only in memory. There's no searchable archive of who they used to be, and that changes everything, because it allowed reinvention. It gave them space to become someone new, without being watched, without being tracked, without being judged in real time. So privacy to them isn't optional, it's normal. Oversharing doesn't feel natural, it feels risky. Because they remember a time when your life wasn't public by default. And that creates a different relationship with identity itself. In today's world, this difference is starting to matter more, because workplaces now include multiple generations at once, and most of them struggle to understand each other. But this group doesn't. They can sit in a face-to-face meeting and understand it, then switch to digital tools, messages, platforms, systems without friction. They understand both sides, not just how to use the tools, but why they exist in the first place. They can translate between worlds, between mindsets, between communication styles, and that makes them something most teams quietly depend on. The bridge, the connector, the one who reduces friction without being noticed. For a long time, this identity didn't have a name. It just felt like not fitting in. Not Gen X, not Millennial, just somewhere in between. But that between space was never empty. It was shaping you, training you, building a mind that understands two completely different realities. You carry the patience of an analog past and the adaptability of a digital world. And that combination isn't common. So maybe the question isn't why you never fully fit into a generation. Maybe it's this. What happens to a mind that was built for two different worlds? In a time that only recognizes one.